The stunning Razor Crest, a ship that has already become iconic and has been replicated from Lego in this amazing UCS model. This set has surprised every Lego Star Wars fan with its size and sleekness, thanks to a surprisingly good use of tiled surfaces and most importantly for being in scale with minifigures. Not to mention that this is probably the only ship in this series that comes with full interiors with an incredible attention to details. If you've seen my previous video about my transformation of the latest UCS X-Wing into a movie-accurate model, you will know that I like to reach accuracy in Lego models. And in this video, I'll show you which changes I made to this amazing set, so if you own the UCS Razor Crest, it's time to pick it up from your shelf and give it a tweak. This is probably the first thing you thought about doing on your Razor Crest after building it. The designer of the ship left this surface incompleted for some reason, so completing it is a no-brainer. Just pick some grey plates and fill the gaps by yourself with ease. Just pay attention to the front of the ship where the line starts to tighten. To fill the angle gaps, I used a 2x4 wedge plate, and since I had an inverted 4x8 grey tile left from the X-Wing, I decided to put it in the middle of the ship. There's nothing wrong with the front landing gear, but if you want to give the ship a better look, I suggest to remove the landing gear first, then add 2 dark grey or light grey inverted round slopes on the sides of the Technic piece to cover its holes, and then put the landing gear back on the ship. By doing so, it will look more solid, without the holes of the Technic piece showing in a pretty ugly way. Another flaw that you probably encountered on your Razor Crest is probably the wobbliness of these side panels. When opening the side ramp, there's a pretty annoying movement within the panel, but it can be fixed easily. First, you need to remove the entire panel from the ship. Then you just need 2 1x2 ties for each side. I used 4 grill pieces, since I had many of those in my inventory. Simply put the panel back on the ship and the problem should be fixed. Please note that there's less space for the insert of the panels now, so it's more difficult to put it back, but once you do it, you will notice immediately the effects of the mod, and the panel won't move at all. This passage is highly recommended if you want to follow the next interior operation too. In this one, I'm raising some walls to close the gaps that you see by removing the big canopy dome. After you remove the angled panels with stickers on them, you can proceed with the passages that you see right now. After completing this area, simply put the panels with stickers back on the ship. Also at this point, you want to remove the ladder since we're going to modify that too later. This is one of my favorite modifications I made to the set, and one makes the model look even cooler than before. First thing I did was to add another layer of dark grey plates on the underside to make the entire thing sturdier and thicker. To start, remove the seats, then these brackets to have access to the 1x2 ties behind them. I changed the floor in this section, swapping the grill piece and the 2x2 tile. Now, these small assemblies are mirrored and are crucial to the final look of the whole floor inside the ship. Put them sideways like so and put the ties back on their place. At this point, you can reattach the brackets to the build and, instead of putting back the 2x3 ties first, you want to put a 2x3 plate in between, to minimize the gaps when the assembly will be inside the ship. These are the new passenger seats I made for the ship, and as you may have noticed, they're the same design as the pilot seat, since I noticed that in the real ship they're all the same. Place the new seats back and then you want to cover these exposed studs. I used 2 different printed 1x1 tiles to add detail to the door frame. The next step is modifying the door. To go on with the modifications, you will need to raise the door attachment up by 1 stud. You'll see why in a second. We're going to add walls to this wall back section of the modular floor to give the ship a more complete look, and we start from the left side with this 3x9 panel. The panel has a thickness of 2 plates. The panel will be connected with a door frame and a 2x2 modified plate on the opposite side. This is the reason why the door attachment had to be raised. Then comes the right side panel, which is shorter and connects only to one side, so we need to make the connection stronger with a 2x3 curved slope. You also want to fill the corners, so just stack some 1x1 bricks in there and add 2 1x6 plates and a tile to complete this section. I put a round pin element on the left panel to connect Din Djarin's rifle, and I have to say it's really cool seeing it laid there on that pose. Finally, put the modified door back on its place and the modular floor is now complete. Before putting the floor back on the ship, you need to modify the ladder. First, swap the nugget clip piece with a grey one and simply follow these steps. Put the ladder back on the ship and enjoy the new interiors by sliding the modular floor into the ship. Please note that the process is trickier because there are no gaps and the whole thing is much tighter than before, but once you find the perfect spot, seeing the whole thing slide down is very satisfying. This model is so good that you want to be as clean as possible. But what about this gap on the back of the canopy dome? Simply remove the panel and follow these steps. Obviously, do the same thing for the opposite panel but mirrored. What was bugging me the most about this part was this perfectly square detail that, as seen in the Mandalorian show, should be rounded. But before doing anything about it, I wanted to do some color and pieces swapping, so if you want, just follow these steps. Now it's time to make the square round, so you need to do some disassembling and change few things. The mod is quite simple but very effective and requires few extra pieces. The result is a somewhat round shape and is surprisingly good to look at. The back end of the ship is fine but not perfect, since there is something not very convincing, like these gaps that in my opinion have no reason to be present. To start modifying this area, remove the entire top panel from the ship. First, we need to change the look of this edge. Remove the pieces, leaving the brackets exposed, and then place these 3 pieces instead. Now detach this assembly from the top panel. In order to delete that gap, we need to move the wedge plates to the back by 2 studs. Put the assembly back on the top panel and do the same for the opposite one but mirror it. It's time to see if the modification is effective, and as you can see, the gaps are gone. things get serious now. If you own this model, you must have thought for sure that the engine don't blend really well with the rest of the ship. I mean, they kinda do, but there's so much gappiness that the original Razor Crest that you see in the show doesn't have. For this part that we're gonna cover, the model will have the left side as the original set and the right one already modified for obvious reasons. The modification will touch both the front section of the engines and the back too, though the back is slightly easier to mod. Let's start by removing every modular part of the interested area. We begin with the smaller part. It's an easy modification and you will need few extra pieces. The only rare piece that you need to use is a 2x6 wedge plate, but I took it from another part of the ship since the model has many of those. Now comes the most consistent mod that will require some extra pieces. You need to find 14 of 1x2 cheese slopes. That is a big amount of pieces, I know, but they're extremely important for the final result. Take a look at this shot. On the left you have the model in its original look, with a thick line that ends in a big gap near the engine. Even my finger fits in there. On the right instead, the 7 cheese slopes confer to the model a continuous edge line that leads to the engine without any gap. Let's return back to the big modular part and start by detaching the angle assembly. You will need to take it apart completely since we're going to build it again from the ground up. For this process, you need quite some extra pieces, I'm afraid. Now do the same for the other side, but mirrored. Put the assemblies in place and the next step is cleaning out the surface of the panel by removing as many gaps as possible. This is the solution I came up with. The next step is changing a few things on the engines in order to accommodate the modification we made to the previous two panels. Since the engine block goes in between them, some changes need to be done unfortunately. What I did first on the engines was to replace the dark grey slopes with silver ones, to add some silver touch to the Razor Crest. Now remove this small panel and modify it like so. Take this slope off too and replace it with this small build. Now put the previous panel in place. By doing so, we have adapted this area to the other modular part. Remove this little cheese slope and start taking apart the engine intake like so. Remove this portion with the curved slope and put it aside for a second moment. This other build must be taken out too and modified like so, replacing the dark grey slope with a 1x2 brick. Now use the same dark grey slope to change the look of this other assembly. This is the last modification you can make to your Razor Crest. As you can see, these little parts don't blend with the engines very well. There's this little gap that can be fixed. Take the assembly and rip it off from the engine block. Again, you'll need to take the whole thing apart since it's necessary to rebuild it from the ground up. The objective is to make all the tiles move by half stud. To do so, a big amount of 1x3 jumpers and 1x2 jumpers are required. The end result is a wing that barely touches the engines and look continuous without any gap. There you go, we went through every modification I made to the UCS Razor Crest. I know some extra pieces are required, but if you like the end result, consider giving it a chance. The feeling I get from this model now is like having a collector model like the ones from Hasbro or something. Lifting the canopy dome now reveals a much more convincing interior, like you would expect from a premium model. Whether you think sets should have been modified or you like to improve sets too, I think this set is a jewel and a must-have for any LEGO Star Wars fan. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.